In the lost media community and the search for missing content, it's often that you come across a topic that is believed to exist, but doesn't have enough proof to show that it actually does. This is a recognized category in the community called existence unconfirmed, and I'm sure you've heard of a couple famous topics from this area of lost media, including Yaya Beavis, a cancelled video game, and Hitogata, a spooky PSA that aired in Japan. In both of these cases, there are claims, sources, and evidence that suggest these pieces of media are real. However, nothing showing that they were actually made and exist has come forward or can be found. And to my surprise, there have been a lot more existence unconfirmed topics that have shown up, some of which are really surprising to hear about given their context. Today, let's take a look at a batch of new topics from this category and see if we can determine if they really exist, or are nothing more than rumors and false leads. It goes without saying that the majority of cartoons or any entertainment media start with a pilot, an original outline or vision of what the final series will become, and these topics in themselves have always been popular. Searches for the Kappa Mikey pilot that was pitched to MTV before Nickelodeon, and the Jimmy Two Shoes pilot, which featured more intense concepts than the final show, are really well known and have plenty of visuals to see, as well as information from the crew proving they were made and exist. But what about a pilot to another popular cartoon that doesn't have any visuals directly from it, and is only rumored to exist based on evidence? This is about Paw Patrol, a series that probably needs no introduction because of how popular it's become over the past few years. I had heard about Paw Patrol several years ago, but now it feels like it's everywhere, and it's probably because of this new popularity that fans have started looking for the original pilot of the show. However, if you search the internet for that kind of content, you won't find much that directly talks about it. For those unaware, Paw Patrol wasn't always the iconic show it's become, and instead it started out much differently. The original idea behind Paw Patrol dates back to 2010, after Spin Master created a prototype of a transforming truck toy. It was decided that they wanted to make a television show based around the concept of a transforming truck, and took proposals from industry professionals to come up with a direction for the project. While the majority of these pitches are lost in themselves, the chosen proposal was made by Keith Chapman, who also created Bob the Builder. One of the first sketches for Paw Patrol can be seen online, and was titled Raffi and the Rescue Pups at this point in production. But shortly after, revisions started. The details of the dogs were constantly changed, like names, sizes, and breeds, as well as Raffi having several name changes too, before Ryder was agreed on. The art style of the show went through several revisions as well, having been more realistic looking at one point, which can be seen in a second piece of concept art, until they were then changed to their more cartoony style. Eventually in 2013, Nickelodeon licensed Paw Patrol in a partnership with Spin Master, and the series started airing in August of that year, which is what we know today. But when it comes to a potential pilot, it's not clear at all if or when a pilot would have been made, or if one was even made at all. None of the interviews or details about Paw Patrol mention an actual pilot, only that Spin Master convinced Nickelodeon to pick up the show in 2012, following one of the revisions. It's possible that at this time, some kind of test could have been made to show Nickelodeon, but it's equally as possible something was created earlier on that was never mentioned. Jungle Junction from Playhouse Disney, for example, had 3 test pilots made for it over the duration of its creation period, all of which were hardly known about and still don't have any content from them having resurfaced. The Lost Media Wiki article also has a variety of additional concept art from the different stages of development, which use a handful of designs from other points in time, but how far each one got beyond this concept art is still not clear. But the 3 years that Paw Patrol spent in development is still a large mystery. I'm glad we do have those pieces of concept art though. Without them, there would be nothing that tells the history of the series from its earlier time in development, but whether or not a pilot exists at all is still up for debate. It seems like there's never an end to the mysteries surrounding old video games, whether that's related to betas, unlockables in the game, or in this case, cancelled games that never came out. The games from this kind of era are especially interesting to talk about when you look back into the 90s, long before companies would directly reach consumers through social media, and fans had to rely on gaming publications or the press to give them accurate information. Now, we've talked about plenty of rumored games on the channel before, but this topic is one that I've actually never heard about, and really wonder how it would have worked at all if it released. Well, if it was actually planning on being released in the first place, I should say, because we're not sure the game was ever even in development at all. Let's take a look at Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, a Japanese arcade game that was pretty mysterious for much longer than you might expect. I remember back in the early 2010s, having first come across this game not knowing what the heck it was, thinking that Mighty and Ray were actually prototype designs to Tails and Knuckles back then. But nowadays, with these characters' new popularity, the game is a lot more well known. It was released in 1993 in Japanese arcades only, and famously featured a special trackball as a controller to move the characters through a series of platforming levels. However, it was because of this special control method that has to this day prevented a re-release of the game from ever happening, as the control scheme is said to be too hard to recreate with a normal game controller. Sega Sonic the Hedgehog was supposed to be included in Sonic Gems collection on the GameCube, but cancelled as a result of this. Though apparently, new information has come forward that suggests the GameCube was not the first console where a home port was attempted to be made. And this brings us to a video game magazine. 2 video game magazines, in fact. In the October 1994 issue of Computer and Video Games, as well as Mean Machine Sega, both UK articles reported on rumors that Sega Sonic the Hedgehog was being ported to the 32X add-on for the Mega Drive. Though if you read each mention closely, it never actually says Sega Sonic and only says the Sonic the Hedgehog arcade game in a single line of text without any more details. It's implied that this is referencing Sega Sonic, as the Waku Waku Sonic car was the only other arcade game out at the time, and it wasn't much of a game. But what's unfortunate is that there are no other details given about the project. This means it was either so early on in development that nothing had even been done on it yet, or it never really existed and this was just a rumor. The Lost Media Wiki article mentions that both of these magazines were published by EMAP, which implies the rumor of the port came from the larger company itself, and considering there was never a mention of this game anywhere else at the time, that seems likely. So the question remains about if this was actually planned, or if it was another fake rumor to catch people's attention, as was so common back in those days. I suppose it would be possible to track down some of the writers for these magazines if they're online, and ask them directly about it, but even if it was planned, it's not surprising why it was cancelled. Releasing Sega Sonic the Hedgehog would have meant releasing a special trackball controller that nobody would have bought for one game, especially for an add-on like the 32X that was discontinued around a year after the game was mentioned. The wiki article also says that the port could have been considered for the Sega Saturn at a later time, but there's no evidence to suggest that, and it's only speculation. I do remember coming across some magazine scans that mentioned Sonic the Fighters was planned to be released on the Saturn, which we know was supposed to happen. And while that game never came out, maybe if it had been successful, it would have given Sega more confidence to try another arcade port, and Sega Sonic would have finally had its console home. Not to mention, with all the weird peripherals that did release in Japan for the Saturn, it probably wouldn't have felt that weird to release a trackball controller for one game, especially when that game was Sonic. Going back to existence unconfirmed pilots, we have another one from a show that aired on Nickelodeon, though it's much less popular than Paw Patrol. I wouldn't really say that in a bad way though, it's very nostalgic, and I'm sure some of you watching this will get reminded that the show exists and bring back some memories. It's the Rubba-Dubbers, a show that I remember watching on the channel growing up, and was very memorable for its stop-motion style. Before airing on Nickelodeon, however, it originally aired on CBeebies in the UK from 2002 to 2005, and even before that, the early development of the series had a few differences compared to the final show that we've all watched. Originally, the show was titled Plug, after the main frog character in the show, prior to his name being changed to Tub in the final version. This early name can be seen in the series logo, which was filed for trademark in the UK in April 2001, with the show beginning production in 2002. But it was in these earlier years where the mystery begins, in trying to find evidence for the existence of the lost pilots to the Rubba-Dubbers. The search starts on the Lost Media Wiki article, but the information presented here and where it leads is a little confusing. This article says that in the early 2000s, the first pilot of the Rubber Dubbers was made, while still under the Plug name, and that a second pilot titled Splish Splash Sploosh was also created after. The source of these is apparently a Wikipedia article and another article from a website called C21 Media. However, if you visit the Wikipedia page first, you'll notice that there's no additional source proving either of these pilots exist, with the only link being that previously mentioned C21 article. So this is all we have to work with. Now, taking a look at this article doesn't reveal a whole lot of information either, other than the fact that it specifically states pilot episodes will be made available by the end of the year, though it doesn't say how many that includes, and that the Plug name was still being used by that point, rather than it having been changed to the Rubber Dubbers. However, there is no mention on what the titles of these pilots are, any visuals that accompany them, or if they were actually made at all. I still have no idea where the title of Splish Splash Sploosh even came from. It seems like, based on the sources collected between the Lost Media Wiki article and Wikipedia page, the C21 Media write-up is the only living source that even mentions the existence of pilots, but without further details, it's hard to say if they actually exist at all. And finally, there's another piece of information that can be found online from a user who mentioned they contacted a writer on the show, which could possibly tilt the scales one way or another for whether or not pilots were even made. This writer says, "I don't think there ever was a pilot. Animation is so expensive to produce that it doesn't often happen. I think Tub the Pirate was the first episode made. I have seen some bits of test animation of characters walking and the splash effects. This topic kind of reminds me a lot of Astrology with Squidward, a search that basically lived off of unsourced false Wikipedia claims that ended up not being true. I think people might have mistook the Plug logo as having come from some kind of pilot and not acting as a standalone piece of media, and Splish Splash Sploosh could have been made up for the fact that this article mentioned that more than one pilot was supposed to be made. Unfortunately, I don't see any proof of them existing, and combine that with the quote from the writer, it seems even less likely. You could make a point that we don't even know if this quote is real, it could have been made up since there's no name or screenshot attached to it, but until a good piece of evidence comes forward that can be sourced proving these pilots were made, I'm going to say they probably don't exist. I've said this before, but I'll say it again, because it still holds up. You never know what you're going to find by browsing articles and threads on the Lost Media Wiki. There have been so many times where I found topics I never would have seen otherwise, and sometimes they really pique my interest, like this next one, which I actually did a lot of research on months ago, but currently, it's still up for debate about if it's real. In April of this past year, I came across a newly written article about Pawn Stars of all shows. I remember watching Pawn Stars growing up, but never figured there'd be any lost media related to the show, so I quickly found myself on wanting to uncover this content. This isn't a lost episode or some kind of pilot to the show, but rather an entire precursor to the show itself from 8 years before it premiered on the History Channel. There are rumors that claim, in 2001, PBS produced a documentary about the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, the one from the show, and that the documentary in itself is entirely lost. Currently, the earliest TV appearance of the shop is a segment from Dave Attell's show in 2003, so if this PBS documentary really exists, it would be from 2 years prior. I think archiving that kind of content would be so cool to see, but unfortunately, there is only a little bit of evidence to even start searching with. The entire claim that this documentary exists in the first place is sourced to an article from the Huffington Post in 2012, where it's mentioned by name, having apparently come from a secondary source that contains a large index of articles. But if you actually go through that index and look through the details yourself, you'll find that there's no mention of a Pawn Stars PBS special in it at all. It's like the Huffington Post just made it up and didn't actually get the information from anywhere. But if you read further into that article, it gets a little more interesting, as it contains a quote from Rick Harrison, one of the owners of the shop, who appears on the show. If you do a Google search for this quote online, it doesn't seem to exist anywhere else. Again, it's like the Huffington Post just made this up. It's another detail of this article that isn't sourced and can't be found anywhere else. Though just because the quote doesn't have a source, doesn't exactly mean it's fake. The Lost Media Wiki article for this topic speculated that it might have come from a 2011 GIA symposium where Rick spoke, but unfortunately that entire conference is lost too, so we can't verify if it actually came from there. I tried to find a copy of that too, thinking that someone must have recorded it as Pawn Stars was big enough in 2011 for someone to want to save it, which is when I found an article that talked about the symposium that wrote about Rick having spoken at it. Now, what's most important about this article are two different details. One is that it once again mentions Rick having starred in that PBS documentary that no one can seem to find, but second is that the article is dated June 2011. This predates the Huffington Post article by a year, and is the earliest mention of this lost PBS documentary online, meaning the Huffington Post article isn't relevant anymore, as they could have just taken their information from here, which definitely could have happened. But now the question becomes, where did this article get its information from? I noticed that the way it's written, they either did have a copy of the Lost Symposium event, watched it, and took quotes from it, or had someone else at the event take notes and write the article after. There's also a video of Rick answering a question at the event, so I would trust that this information is accurate, which means it's possible we're looking at the origin of the PBS documentary claim. However, to confirm that idea, I would still like to know where the article got its information from, if it had a copy of the symposium, or if there's some third source out there that this site actually took the PBS documentary claim from before June 2011. In a separate part of this search, I also did look briefly on the PBS website on the Wayback Machine to see if there were any mentions or listings of the documentary there, but I didn't find any. I'm guessing it wouldn't be there or someone would have found it by now. But if it was released as part of a specific series or had an unexpected title, it could be hiding without anyone knowing it's there. It's also very possible that the mention of a PBS documentary is some kind of misunderstanding or misremembering over the years that's been passed around so heavily it's been taken as fact. Pawn Stars did have a couple earlier pilots that were made and rejected, so maybe someone confused it with one of those, or actually saw a different PBS documentary and thought it was Pawn Stars. It wouldn't be the first time someone remembered content that didn't exist, but it would be nice to get an answer on if it's real, or if it's fake, when the information that it existed started being taken as fact. We've made it to the last segment of the video, and we're going to end with another rumored pilot. This time, to a show that I don't know much about, but apparently it's gotten really popular lately. I think it was on a live stream when the viewers told me to check out the Lost Media Wiki article about it in the first place, and now it's become as wanted as any of the other kids show pilots like Team Umizoomi and the Little Einsteins that still haven't been found. This is the pilot to Word Girl, a show that ran on PBS Kids from 2007 to 2015, and before that, as a short series from 2006 to 2007. However, similar to the other pilots mentioned in this video, there too exists a supposed Word Girl pilot from the show's earlier years, but it's not clear what exactly it contains, or if it even exists. Word Girl animator Amy McDonald uploaded a few pieces of early concept art of the characters from the show to her website, taken from a promotional Bible for the show. These are dated 2005, which puts them from before Word Girl even premiered as a short series on PBS Kids. So the characters all appear with earlier designs and are accompanied by descriptions of who they are in the show. But it's not anything in these pieces that people noticed, it's the descriptions that they were given, which says, "Cover of promotional Bible used to generate interest in the show at pilot stage." This little piece of information that mentions the pilot stage has led people to believe that it means an actual pilot for the series was created and animated using these early designs and is currently lost. However, the existence of a real pilot is not clear, and there is no other material from this rumored pilot available online. There isn't even any other early content that's been posted either. Nobody knows what Amy means by pilot stage, and I'm not sure if anyone has asked her either. It seems like there's enough interest in the show now where she could answer that question for everyone. But if I had to guess, I would say there probably wasn't a pilot. It's because of the fact that Word Girl existed as a short series before the final show came out. Those shorts probably acted as the pilot in some way. It sorta reminds me of Ni Hao Kai Lan and the precursor shorts to that show, Downward Doghouse. There is no actual Ni Hao Kai Lan pilot because Downward Doghouse was made first, and I'm thinking Word Girl is probably similar. Though it's also possible, and I wouldn't be surprised, if test animations were made, similar to what the writer said about the Rubbadubbers, and those would still be considered lost media if they exist. Though even if there is no full pilot to Word Girl, until we get the confirmation that it doesn't exist, it's fun to think about the possibility that it might, and that goes for any of the existence unconfirmed topics. Thinking about a piece of content that is so elusive, nobody is even sure if it's real, is part of the fun of looking for lost media, and it can sometimes make the reward that much better if it does exist. Or if it doesn't, it can give you some more insight about how a rumor was able to grow into a larger topic that maybe it never would have reached otherwise. Either way, they both make for fun searches and experiences in the community's goal to find lost media of all kinds. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to check out some of my other lost media videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Finn.